to get someone prosecuted is pretty difficult.
You've brought in some cameras since then, haven't you?
Yes, we put in 6 cameras in 6 of the hot spots, and we moved them around, and they seem to be a deterrent because we've had to put a sign up, of course, human rights cover that, and we've seen a fairly rapid reduction in dumping at those sites and around the district.
That's very pleasing. So hang on, so if I dump rubbish by the side of the road and there's no sign that I can see telling me not to, have I not committed an offence?
No, the sign says CCTV in action.
Oh, I see. I've got to know about that, do I?
Yeah.
Or it's not just deterrence. You have to legally have that, do you?
No. It's just a deterrence.
It's just deterrence, okay.
Yeah.
So Auckland's cameras will work to an extent. That's what we need now, is it?
Yeah, I mean, in Rotorua, the cost of illegal dumping is about $150,000 a year. I'd rather have that money spent on kids' playgrounds and roading projects and things like that, rather than having to pick up these absolute lowlifes who dump these things. But Jim, it's just not residential people who are doing it. We've just recently, one of our rural skips, 115 TVs were dumped. Now,
really?
There has to be a commercial operator doing that sort of thing. The same in Auckland with the tyres. There's got to be a tyre company doing that.
Yeah.
You know, so these guys have got to be caught. They're getting the evidence. The number plate isn't sufficient. We had one recently in Paradise Valley Road. They were caught in the act doing it, and the lady forgot to get the number plate. She told the guy picked it up. And, it's just disgusting, the whole outfit.
You've got some experience tracking people down who've dumped, haven't you?
It is my utter pet peeve, people who illegally dump rubbish. So we work with the council quite closely, and people dump rubbish bags all over the place, and we'll go through the rubbish bags forensically, identifying who they may have come from. So there's always going to be a docket or a package slip or something which identifies who they are, and then the council follows up.
They're lazy people, so they make those errors. We found one dumped on Otaral Road, and we traced it to a house in Cleaston Crescent, where a tenant had just left and flew out for Australia that day, so we couldn't do anything about that.
Shame.
But again, the ratepayers have to pay to clean it up.
Can I ask you something? Why don't we just make landfills free, Charles? What would you think about that?
Well, that would be good, but we'd have to charge everybody in their rates for the landfills.
Yeah, we would.
The landfills are exceedingly expensive to run, and no one wants them in their backyard. Our landfills probably got another 10, 15 years ago, and we've just instituted December year before last, curbside recycling. So you've got a recycling bin, a general rubbish bin, and a glass container. I'm pushing at the moment to get a green waste bin, and also an inorganic collection once a year throughout Rotorua.
Good on you, Charles, and for your sterling work on trying to detrash New Zealand. Charles Sturt. Stephanie, just a last word from you. I mean, if we do spend that money, as with buses, I suppose, if we had constant inorganics or made landfills free, would that be worth it, do you think, in these cases?
I don't think it would. I think we're looking at a broader issue about culture, increasing recycling. We were just talking about reducing packaging. It's having those kind of more forward-thinking, dare I say, green ideas. Having a green waste collection, as Charles was talking about, sounds like a great idea for reducing what's going into the landfill. So, more green ideas.
More green. Stephanie Rogers, thank you. Lovely to have you on the panel.
Cheers.
And Mark Knopf-Thomas, always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
We're back on Monday. Have a lovely weekend, everybody, whether you're working or not, and Checkpoint's coming up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, more details emerge following yesterday's massacre at a Florida high school. After killing 17 people, Nicholas Cruz fled the school hidden in a crowd of frightened students before visiting Subway and McDonald's. Also tonight, last night we met Shane Chamberlain and Diane Moody to look at their victory over the Ministry of Health and the Court of Appeal. Tonight we reveal 13 more families head to court for the right to be paid to look after their severely disabled adult children at home. Clear the drains and spend the weekend tying everything down. A Met Service warning ahead of the arrival of tropical Cyclone Gita. That coming up. And Barnaby Joyce and Malcolm Turnbull. To put it nicely, things aren't going very well.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. Hundreds of people have gathered for a prayer vigil in Parkland, Florida, in the wake of yesterday's deadly school shooting. 17 people were killed when suspected gunman Nicholas Cruz opened fire with an AR-15 assault rifle at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The 19-year-old had been expelled from the school and had left warning signs on social media. Student Isabel Martinez hid in a closet during the shooting spree. Speaking at today's vigil, she said what happened at her school must be a catalyst for strict gun control.
I think everyone's just in shock that it happened here, and we don't want this to be like all the others where in a couple months everyone's completely forgotten. And I know that this graduating class and also all the other classes are very, very strong and very, very opinionated, and we're not going to stop talking about it.
Student Isabel Martinez. Earlier today, the President Donald Trump spoke about keeping schools safe and tackling mental health without mentioning gun control. New Caledonia's Isle of Pines will be on maximum alert tonight as Cyclone Gita approaches. The alert means residents have to stay indoors. A senior official in Noumea, Cameron Driver, says Gita remains a Category 3 storm.
Which means that they should basically start getting prepared for strong winds, the seas that can accompany that, to secure property and ensure that when alert level 2, which is the highest level of alert, comes in place, people can just head straight home and stay safe. But for the moment, that's only for the Isle of Pines, and the rest of New Caledonia remains on pre-alert.
Mr Diver says people are remaining vigilant, and the strongest impact of the cyclone is expected to be felt in Noumea this evening. Tonga's airport manager says extensive damage to the domestic terminal from Cyclone Gita means all flights are operating out of its international terminal building. Flights in and out of Tonga resumed 2 days after the cyclone caused mass destruction in Nuku'alofa early Tuesday morning. The domestic terminal's roof was blown off and airline equipment and computers were badly damaged. A Christchurch professor says Chinese government spies trying to intimidate her are behind a break-in at her home on Wednesday. Anne-Marie Brady says the police are investigating a letter she received this week warning that she would be attacked. Professor Brady made the revelations to an Australian Parliamentary Security Committee. She had been asked if she had faced any intimidation over her work researching the Chinese government's attempts to expand its influence outside China.
In December last year, I also had a break-in my office, and I got a warning letter just this week saying that I was going to be attacked. And then on Wednesday, I got a break-in my house, and I had 3 laptops stolen.
Anne-Marie Brady, a professor in political science at the University of Canterbury. A man who was with Sir Peter Blake in Brazil the night he was fatally shot in 2001 says he's glad one of the men responsible for his death will face justice. José Aranji Cardoso has been recaptured after being on the run for nearly 16 years. He had been sentenced to 32 years jail for his part in the armed robbery and killing of Sir Peter on the Amazon River. Mark Oram says today he has been feeling a sense of sadness and loss.
But for the great majority of the time, my thoughts of Peter are really, really positive and kind of full of gratitude and for having known him and been inspired by him. And so, there are not many days that go by that I don't think about him, actually.
A friend of the late Sir Peter Blake, Mark Oram. A very public spat has broken out between Australia's Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and his deputy Barnaby Joyce. Yesterday, Mr Turnbull publicly chastised Mr Joyce over his affair with a former staffer, saying it was a shocking error of judgment, and he banned sex between ministers and staff. Today, Mr Joyce has hit back, saying Mr Turnbull has made the situation worse.
Comments by the Prime Minister yesterday at his press conference, I have to say that in many instances they caused further harm. I believe they were in many instances inept and most definitely in many instances unnecessary.
Barnaby Joyce, who is also the leader of the National Party, also says the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister should not be interfering in what is his party's business. A proverbial plague of frogs has hit Papamoa near Mount Maunganui for the second summer in a row. Young green and golden bell frogs are getting into people's houses at night looking for bugs. But locals are unnerved by the hopping amphibians, particularly because they give out a high-pitched scream when they get trapped in an unfamiliar indoor environment. Carolyn Chatterton says she's had enough.
One woke my husband up and he said it was on the ceiling and it actually fell onto the floor. And they make this horrendous squealing noise when they're either confronted or they're scared of something. That's what they're doing inside the house. They're just squealing the whole time. So they're obviously frightened of being inside and not being able to get out.
University of Otago frog expert Professor Phil Bishop says a single female bell frog can lay 3,500 eggs in a season, and young frogs moving away from ponds may end up briefly in people's homes. It's 5:06. The New Zealand skeleton sled racer Rhys Thornberry's endured a horror final run on the medal round at the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. Thornberry went into the fourth and final round in sixth equal spot, but lost his run up just as he was about to launch himself onto the skeleton. He eventually posted a time of 52.14 seconds, nearly a second and a half slower than his best run of the competition, to finish 20th.
And it's for Rhys Thornberry, who's lost it out of the guide grooves. That can happen. They're there to make it easier. Doesn't mean it's easy. And that's a disaster for Thornberry. And it just took off on him, didn't it? Right arm down. He did really well to hold that together, but he put too much pressure on it. That's Olympic devastation writ large.
And that commentary from Sky TV. South Korea's Yeon Seung-bin won the gold medal, becoming the first athlete from outside Europe and North America to win an Olympic sliding medal. Meanwhile, it was also a tough day for New Zealand skier Alice Robinson, who failed to complete her opening run and is effectively out of contention in the women's slalom. A near sellout crowd of 50,000 is expected for tonight's Eden Park 2020 Cricket International between New Zealand and Australia, with the visitors having already confirmed themselves a place in the Tri-Series final next week. If they win, the Black Caps too will advance to the final, making Sunday's game against England irrelevant. A loss, though, means they will need to beat England on Sunday to make the final. The game starts at 7 o'clock. And that's the news.
On the programme tomorrow, Johan Hari, who was on the meds for years, reckons he knows the real causes of anxiety and depression. Lost Connections is the name of his book. It's controversial for several reasons. Poet and memoirist Patricia Lockwood, extraordinary writer, her prose poem Rape Joke became a viral sensation in 2013. And Peter Hitchens, who was not of a mind with his late brother Christopher, gives us his take on Brexit, which he supported. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Med Service to midnight tomorrow. From Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Long, fine spells. Isolated showers about eastern Northland today and developing elsewhere tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine. However, cloudy periods and the odd light shower about the Tararua district. Orowhenua to Wellington, cloudy, a few showers, mainly about the ranges. Marlborough and Nelson, fine today, a few showers developing tomorrow morning about Golden Bay and the Sound, spreading elsewhere in the evening. For Bulla, a few showers today, rain tomorrow, briefly heavy, then clearing later. Westland and Fiordland, rain, heavy with possible thunderstorms, spreading north today. Clearing from the south tomorrow, but a few showers remaining about Fiordland. Canterbury to Southland, high cloud with scattered rain in Southland and Otago this evening, spreading elsewhere tomorrow morning before clearing. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's at 5:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
You are indeed. Thank you very much, Anna Thomas.
Go.
Oh, well, we've got a busy program tonight. Coming up, 13 more families take the Ministry of Health to court over being paid to care for their severely disabled children, or not being paid, as the case may be. Also, Malcolm Turnbull and Barnaby Joyce They are really not getting along at all well. But we begin tonight with the teenager responsible for the Florida high school massacre, who fled the school hidden in a crowd of frightened students before visiting Subway and McDonald's and then being arrested. 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz triggered the school's fire alarm just after 2:15 in the afternoon yesterday, sending students into the hallways before he began his rampage, killing at least 17 people, including students, teachers and a parent.
Nicholas Dwart, Mr. Christopher Hickson, Mr. Aaron Feiss, Luke Oyer.
A roll call of those who died in the second deadliest public school shooting in US history. As hundreds gathered at a candlelight vigil to pay their respects, there were tears and anger.
I sent her to school yesterday. She was supposed to be safe. My job is to protect my children. And I sent my kid to school. What is unfathomable is Jamie took a bullet and is dead. I don't know what I do next.
Jamie Gutenberg was one of 17 people killed by Nicholas Cruz in yesterday's massacre. Her father, Fred, told hundreds of people gathered at a vigil that his family was broken.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence. It happened in Parkland.
Another father, Jonathan White, said the shooting had taken place too close to home for his daughter.
So it was a crazy ordeal, you know. A kid, you know, on her swim team that she swims with every day was killed. A girl that we carpool with was shot. A teacher that she adores, her English teacher, was shot in the arm. You know, this is not what kids should have to deal with when they go to school, and we shouldn't have to worry about this as parents when we drop them off at school.
Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel described the chilling minutes after Cruz arrived at his former school in an Uber just after 2:15 yesterday.
At 2:21 hours and 33 seconds, the suspect readied his rifle and began shooting into rooms 1215, 1216, 1214. The suspect then took the west stairwell to the second floor and shot one victim. He exited building 12 and ran towards the tennis courts. The suspect crossed fields and ran west along with others who were fleeing and tried to mix in with the group that were running away, fearing for their lives.
Sheriff Scott Israel said Cruz then visited a Subway restaurant inside a nearby Walmart where he purchased a drink before walking to McDonald's, where he sat down for some time before his arrest. It was also revealed Cruz may have left warning signs on social media. In September last year, the FBI said it had received a tip-off about a comment posted to Cruz's YouTube account.
The comment said, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." There was no additional information about the particular time, location, or further identifiers about the person who posted the comment.
The comment was removed by YouTube, and FBI agent Robert Lasky told media the FBI didn't take the concerns any further. Meanwhile, 19-year-old Cruz, who was expelled from Stoneman Douglas School last year, appeared in court today, shackled and handcuffed and dressed in an orange boiler suit. He cut a lonely figure as he stood, head bowed before the judge, facing 17 counts of premeditated murder.
He went loaded with an AR-15 rifle. He had additional ammunition with him and shot 17 individuals who later died as a result of the gunshot wounds, and then he fled the scene. So the state is seeking a no bond hold on the defendant.
As Cruz was remanded in custody, Cruz's court-appointed legal team described him as a broken human being and a broken child.
He recognizes he is deeply sad. He is dealing with the shock of all of this that's going on. He is on suicide watch. The child is deeply troubled, and he has endured significant trauma that stems from the loss of his mother.
Cruz is understood to be an orphan since his mother passed away last year. The superintendent of schools, Ron Runcie, urged officials to do more to improve mental health and school safety.
This is bigger than just the school system. Our kids are out of our schools 2/3 of the time that they're up. We need a community-wide approach to helping our students with challenges and mental health concerns. And so, again, we've got to invest resources to make sure that we minimize the occurrence of this ever happening again, because if we don't, it's not a matter of if, it's going to be when.
The Valentine's Day shooting was the 18th in a US school this year. 8 of those shootings have been fatal. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
97 children have been killed and 126 injured. That's in mass shootings, not individual shootings, in American schools since 1989. Yesterday's attack in Florida adding to the tally, of course. And as the cries go up again for tighter gun control, the President Donald Trump again sidestepped that issue, talking about keeping schools safe and tackling mental health, not once mentioning guns. But one of the first things Donald Trump did when he moved into the White House was to roll back measures introduced by President Barack Obama to make it harder for mentally ill people to own firearms. The BBC's John Sopel has this report.
Any guns on you today?
It's the size of an out-of-town DIY centre, but the only things on sale here are weapons. In the US, there are as many guns in circulation as there are people. And they're represented formidably by the National Rifle Association, the most powerful lobbying organisation in the United States. They've successfully resisted every move to tighten gun controls and gave $21 million towards the Trump campaign. He was the star turn at their conference last year, and he is their man.
You have a true friend and champion in the White House. No longer will federal agencies be coming after law-abiding gun owners.
And true to his word, Donald Trump today made no mention of guns or gun control. The problem was mental illness.
No child, no teacher should ever be in danger in an American school. We are committed to working with state and local leaders to help secure our schools and tackle the difficult issue of mental health.
The NRA publicly grades lawmakers from A to F. If you're an A+, you're a legislator with not only an excellent voting record on all critical NRA issues, but who's made a vigorous effort to promote and defend the Second Amendment. And if you're an F, you're a true enemy of gun owners' rights. After mass shooting incidents, the NRA are famously reticent to talk publicly. So we drove out to their headquarters to speak about policy. We didn't get very far.
NRA Security, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine.
I need you to move your car off the property and go across the street a bit. We're going to do anything.
Right, okay? We can't film here?
No. Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
But we just want to get some exterior shots of the building.
Off the property, please. Thank you.
But the NRA is very happy to funnel money to supporters in Congress. So Marco Rubio, the local senator who tweeted his horror about the shooting, is an A+, and over the years has received over $3 million from them. Senator Rob Portman, also offering condolences last night, has received $3 million. John McCain, over the course of his career, $7 million.
Hillary lied, and another lie. I respect the Second Amendment.
And the NRA will run attack ads against candidates they don't like.
Hillary will lie about anything to get elected. No more lies. Defeat Hillary.
After the Sandy Hook school shooting in Connecticut, when 20 children aged 6 and 7 lost their lives, a clear majority of the American people favoured tighter gun control. It couldn't get through Congress. Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, and an F on the NRA rating system, told the BBC why.
The NRA remains powerful enough in this place to block any progress. This really is an issue of political power. They've been organizing for 20 to 30 years. The modern anti-gun violence movement really dates from Sandy Hook.
At the NRA, flags have been lowered as a mark of respect to those who died yesterday. But there's nothing half-mast about their defence of the right to bear arms.
And that was John Sopel for the BBC. in Washington. 19 minutes past 5. Checkpoint can tonight report the government is taking advice from officials about yet more court cases against the Ministry of Health by parents caring for severely disabled adult children without being paid to do so. In opposition, Labor promised to review funded family care, FFC, the previous government's initiative to pay people for caring for severely disabled adult children and their families. But FFC has been controversial, with far fewer families than were originally described as eligible receiving money or receiving more than a few paid hours a week. That's been tested in court, where families have won. Last night we met 51-year-old Shane Chamberlain and his 76-year-old mum Diane, who had a major victory against the Ministry of Health at the Court of Appeal. But despite that, we can tonight reveal 13 more families are currently fighting for payment in the High Court. Because they're before the court, we're not reporting on those cases. But we begin with another mother whose child is utterly reliant on constant supervision.
Well, she's got Down syndrome.
Which in this case is severe. This 31-year-old
can't talk. Often can't hear.
A form of isolation made terrible by the diagnosis of schizophrenia as an adolescent. And that's got worse. She now hears voices.
And she argues with them constantly. That distresses her. She can't rationalise it at all, of course, because of her limited capacity. So she is terrified by that.
And medicated for it heavily. And almost unbelievably, she got Graves' disease too.
Which meant that her thyroid went into overdrive and tried to kill her a few years ago. And so she had to have radiation treatment for that and is now on thyroid treatment for the rest of her life.
Obviously, she requires constant care, supervision, medication, calming, feeding, you name it, everything.
It's quite clear that somebody needs to do these things for her all the time. And if I'm not doing them, then somebody else needs to do them.
And here's where things begin to defy understanding. So how much are you paid to care for your severely disabled daughter?
Me? Nothing.
Nothing, not a cent. This mother has studied funded family care, sought advice on funded family care, and by any definition she appears to qualify for it. So why aren't you getting FFC?
I don't know.
She just knows she's not. And she can't afford to stay at home and earn nothing. So she goes to work. And the Ministry of Health pays for someone else to come in.
I get funding to pay other people to care for her during the time that I'm at work.
But if you didn't go to work and stayed at home, the funding you get to give to other people would not go to you.
No, my understanding is no, that funding can't be used to pay me, no.
And that is an example of the kind of parental exclusion from payment that has seen the Ministry of Health losing all the way from the Human Rights Review Tribunal to the Court of Appeal as recently as last week. That was Shane Chamberlain and his mum Diane Moody, who we met on Checkpoint last night. But their victory is not the end of the matter, because there are more court cases from more families still being fought.
So I'm acting for 13 plaintiffs who have brought a claim against the Ministry of Health, and they are in the same position really as the Diane Moody scenario. They are family members who have looked after their disabled family members for many years and have not been paid to do so by the Ministry of Health.
Yes, you heard lawyer Simon Judd correctly. 13 more plaintiffs in the High Court. Now, they're not getting funded family care, but the taxpayer is funding another long and expensive legal battle against them. And despite the Ministry of Health's loss in the Court of Appeal, the Ministry continues fighting these families in court.
The basic issue is these people have provided care for their family members for many years. As a result, the state has not had to provide that care, so the state hasn't incurred the cost. In other words, if the family members had refused to look after their disabled family member, then the state would have incurred the cost. So they've saved the state a lot of money. And so from a sort of a policy or political level, you'd say, well, isn't it just fair that they be compensated for that?
And that, in a nutshell, was what the previous government said it was going to do.
Question number 11, Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health and asks, what progress is the government making with its funded family care policy?
Honourable Tony Ryle.
Mr Speaker.
The 19th of December 2013, Health Minister Tony Ryall is answering a question from his own party, often a sign of pride or satisfaction in something. Now, listen to the number in his answer because it's crucial.
The new policy being implemented will enable around 1,600 disabled adults who meet the high and very high needs eligibility criteria to pay resident family members to care for them at home for up to 40 hours a week if that's their choice.
1,600. That was the limit of the policy's loftiest ambitions, and it hasn't even got close.
As at 1st of April 2015, only 191 adult disabled persons nationwide were accessing FFC, compared with 1,600 forecast.
That was from an evaluation for the Ministry of Health in 2015. This afternoon, the ministry emailed to say the total number of severely disabled adults funded for family carers is now 354. That's 22% of original projections. So the policy that promised so much has so far delivered much less and repeatedly ended up in court. When will that stop? Well, Simon Judd, who, as we heard, is currently acting for 13 families in the High Court, says there is cause for hope that an end may be in sight.
Labor in their election manifesto did say that they were going to repeal the particular legislation that the previous government put through, and we're going to ensure that family members were paid fairly for looking after their disabled family members. So I guess we're hopeful that with the new government and the new minister, there will be a different attitude, and perhaps we can avoid having to go through another court case.
That's the lawyer Simon Judd, who's acting for those 13 families in the High Court. Of course, that case started under the previous government, the previous Attorney General, and we will keep an eye on whether the new Attorney General, who is of course David Parker, continues to fight those claims against the families in the High Court or works to discuss some kind of settlement with them and the other families. Do stay tuned. We will have that information for you on Checkpoint. All-out war appears to have broken out in Canberra between the Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and his embattled deputy Barnaby Joyce. Remember, they're on the same side, these guys. The pair are openly trading barbs, with Mr Joyce's affair with a former staffer now turning into a full-blown crisis, not only for his own National Party, but obviously for the coalition government. Elizabeth Brown reports.
It's a cautionary tale about personal lives crossing over into politics. Yesterday, seeking to limit the damage to his own party and government, Malcolm Turnbull announced Mr Joyce was taking leave from Parliament. He then took the unusual step of banning all his ministers from having sex with their staff members. It's been dubbed the bonk ban on social media. But in doing so, and apparently without any warning, he publicly chastised his deputy and urged him to consider his position.
We know that the real issue is the terrible hurt and humiliation that Barnaby, by his conduct, has visited on his wife Natalie and their daughters and, indeed, his new partner. Barnaby made a shocking error of judgment in having an affair with a young woman working in his office. In doing so, he has set off a world of woe for those women and appalled all of us.
Just 12 hours later, it seems Barnaby Joyce decided he wasn't taking that.
Comments by the Prime Minister yesterday at his press conference, I have to say that in many instances they caused further harm. I believe they were in many instances inept and most definitely in many instances unnecessary. It was public knowledge what was being repeated. It was public knowledge that had run on the front pages of papers. And all it does is reinvest in the hurt that is held by other people. I don't know if I have to say that because I listened to it and I thought that was completely unnecessary. All that's going to do is basically once more pull the scab off for everybody to have a look at.
Mr Joyce's affair with Vicky Campion, who's now expecting his child, has already caused deep division among his National Party colleagues and calls for him to step down as leader. However, Mr Turnbull's strong words could serve to reunify the caucus. Barnaby Joyce says they don't welcome Mr Turnbull's interference in what he describes as an internal National Party matter.
There is nothing that we dislike more that implied intervention into the party processes of the National Party. We are our own independent political unit. We make our own decisions, especially around those who are the office holders. So I would not be making comments or implied comments about the leadership of the Liberal Party, and we don't expect to get implied comments about the leadership of the National Party.
The opposition Labour Party leader Bill Shorten says neither of the two men deserve their jobs.
Quite frankly, the way these two men are behaving, neither of them are fit for the high office they currently hold. Yesterday, Mr Turnbull declared war on Mr Joyce. Today, Mr Joyce has declared war on Mr Turnbull. Australians have every reason to be angry and frustrated when the two most senior Australian leaders are not focused on anything other than their own jobs.
Malcolm Turnbull is due to leave the country for a week-long overseas trip on Monday, but some are now questioning whether he should go, given his fractured relationship with his deputy and coalition partner. For Checkpoint, Elizabeth Brown.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Come up, clear the drains and tie everything down. A Met Service warning ahead of tropical Cyclone Gita. Where is it most likely to hit? We'll ask. One of the fugitive killers of Sir Peter Blake is recaptured by police after more than 15 years on the run. And our reporter Jessie Chang celebrates Chinese New Year with the Lee family. All of that coming up. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us, of course, at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, where you can also watch the program go to air or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. I'm just going to slide across the table. Multitasking. People say men can't do it, but I just did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, move, got a piece of paper and talk simultaneously. It's a triumph.
That's very impressive. Very
gender.
impressive.
Anna Thomas, I've just passed you the latest, the very latest RNZ headlines.
Superb.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much,
Pleasure.
John. A Christchurch professor says Chinese government spies trying to intimidate her are behind a break-in at her home on Wednesday. Anne-Marie Brady says the police are investigating a letter she received this week warning that she would be attacked. The professor has made the revelations to an Australian Parliamentary Security Committee. Early warnings are being sounded for parts of the North Island and the Upper South Island, which could be in the path of a weakening Cyclone Gita. The large tropical storm is now heading towards the south of New Caledonia, with wind gusts of up to 130 kilometres. It's expected to pass there tomorrow night before veering into the Tasman Sea and is likely to arrive in New Zealand early next week. Hundreds of people gathered for a prayer vigil in Parkland, Florida in the wake of yesterday's deadly school shooting. The Florida police say the teenager accused of using a semi-automatic rifle to kill 17 people at a Florida high school has confessed to the shootings. Nicholas Cruz has told investigators he brought a backpack full of loaded magazines to the school and discarded his gun after the shooting so he could blend in with the fleeing crowd. A man who was with Sir Peter Blake in Brazil the night he was fatally shot in 2001 says he's glad one of the men responsible for his death will finally face justice. José Aranja Cardoso has been recaptured after being on the run for nearly 16 years. He escaped from custody not long after being sent to prison for 32 years. Mark Orams was a friend of Sir Peter and says today he's been feeling a sense of sadness and loss. A public battle has broken out at the top of Australian politics after the Prime Minister publicly chastised his deputy for his affair with a former staffer. Malcolm Turnbull got stuck into Barnaby Joyce, who in turn has angrily lashed out, saying the Prime Minister's comments have caused further harm. Mr Turnbull has now banned sex between ministers and staff. And that's the news.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Let's turn to business news now with Giles Beckford, who is beaming in from Wellington. Looking just as calm as you like, Giles. There's no adrenaline rushes there when you come on.
Oh, I don't have the worries that Barnaby Joyce has, and all I can say is that Barnaby Joyce will probably think that being New Zealand born is the least of the problems that he ever had.
Excellent. Giles, Auckland Airport through which Barnaby Joyce may be travelling in the not-too-distant future, has turned up with a bumper profit.
Indeed, the profits took off today. It's their half-year result. This is a big business. We have to realise that of the near 4 million people who visit New Zealand, about 3/4 of them fly through Auckland Airport. 10 million passengers a year in the past 6 months have gone through there. About slightly over half of them are foreigners, the rest are domestic. But remember, it's also a really big industrial, commercial, retail complex. You know, the terminals are essentially shopping malls which planes call at and drop off passengers. They've got car parks, they've got big warehouses. At Auckland, of course, they've got the big shopping centre just across from the international terminals. So, and of course, in all of this, they're planning for a second runway in the next decade. So these are big business. They're struggling to cope with the facilities now with the passengers that they've got. The question mark is that the $160-odd million that they made the past 6 months, which is up 16% on a year ago, whether that sort of growth can be sustained, given that the expectation is that tourism probably will tail off a bit, that perhaps migration won't be so strong, and of course the costs are still there and rising. We'll wait and see, but for the time being, it's a pretty good performing company. Auckland Council must be happy that it held its stake in there.
Yeah,
and shareholders will be rewarded by an increased interim dividend. And we should note, of course, that we are in the thick of the company reporting season. Next week, we'll have the little shop of horrors that is called Fletcher Building unveiling their full result. We'll also have Air New Zealand and we'll have Spark, the telecommunications company. They're just the notables amongst what's likely to be more than a dozen companies reporting.
Thanks, Charles. Once people get off the planes at Auckland Airport, they often go and get into camper vans, right? And Tourism Holdings is thinking big about those.
They are indeed. Who would have thought that a small company that a few years ago was really struggling with some of its operations, it had various tourist attractions and sort of rental car fleets, but not too big. It's the world's biggest motorhome camper van renter. And it's now decided to do a joint venture, and it's tying up with the world's biggest manufacturer of those sorts of vehicles.
Tourism Holdings is the world's biggest.
It is the world's biggest.
Holy moly.
In New Zealand, we know it as the Brits and Maui brands.
Yeah, that's right.
But also in the United States, a few years ago, it bought into a company called El Monte. If you're in Britain and Europe, you will possibly know the Just Go brand, and of course they're in Australia as well. And they run a thing called My Way, which is a sort of Airbnb of camper vans. I've got my home sitting doing nothing for the next 3 months. I offer it to a foreign visitor to rent it off me, and Tourism Holdings runs the process and does the business between the two of us. Now they're putting all those sorts of things into one digital platform so that in fact they'll be able to look after the bookings, the maintenance, the campsites, whether it's in New Zealand or the States or in Europe. So it's a pretty smart move. It's the way of the future using technology in what you would regard as a pretty ho-hum, humdrum sector, but it's worth around $120-odd million, and we'll wait and see if that delivers the goods. This is a rather ambitious company that started from modest beginnings. They've got a good object and a good ambition of making $50 million profit within the next couple of years, and I have to say that for a smart Kiwi company, all power to their elbow.
Yeah. How did the markets finish the week, Giles?
Well, we've had a positive, strong finish to the top 50 index. Shares up 62 points, 8125. That's about 0.8%. And we're up about 1.5% for the week. 74.2 US cents for the Kiwi and 93.1 Australian. And we'll bring you all the news and the numbers as they're breaking for you next week.
Charles Beckford, our business editor, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Let's go to the weather now with Met Service meteorologist John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. Not a bad looking weekend for us. We've got generally fine weather across a lot of the Northland. There's still areas of cloud and perhaps an isolated shower or two, but temperature-wise, still went back to around about 27 degrees Celsius for Auckland. And in fact, high temperatures across much of the Northland. Now, there will be more cloud, I think, on those western-facing coasts and perhaps an isolated shower in towards the likes of, say, New Plymouth or so. But really, there's plenty of dry weather as well. For the likes of Wellington and up towards the Kapiti coast, it's a cloudier start to the day, and we will find perhaps an isolated shower or two. That cloud, though, with us on and off through the daytime. Highs around about 24 degrees Celsius. Now for the likes of, say, Palmerston North and down towards Whanganui, we will find highs around about 27. Generally dry though, just more cloud. Head out towards the eastern coast, open back to around about 30, 31 degrees Celsius for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. On the South Island, it's rain moving northwards, arriving in towards the likes of Christchurch through the afternoon. And we are going to find temperatures ahead of that, best about 28 degrees Celsius. But there is rain moving up the South Island as we go through daytime, and some heavy falls expected on that western coast. Severe weather warnings in place for parts of Fiordland and Westland. Getting better through the daytime though, a little bit cooler behind it though. Temperatures in Invercargill 20 degrees Celsius compared to, say, highs of about 29 up towards Blenheim. It's worth keeping a close eye on the forecast, especially after the weekend. We have got some more severe weather in store for the start of next week. And that's it from me.
Yes, thanks, John. We will be joined by John's colleague Georgina shortly to discuss the arrival of Gita after the weekend. A friend of Sir Peter Blake says justice has been done after hearing the news that one of the men responsible for his death has been recaptured after years on the run. Mark Orams was with the famous New Zealand yachtsman and environmentalist when he was fatally shot by pirates on a boat in the Amazon in 2001. One of the men jailed over his killing escaped from prison nearly 16 years ago and has been on the loose until his recapture this week. Rowan Quinn reports.
Mark Orams has been thinking about Sir Peter today, as he does almost every day, and has mixed emotions about the news that one of his killers has been recaptured.
In some ways reminds you of the loss of Peter, and there's a sense of sadness. But for the great majority of the time, my thoughts of Peter are really, really positive and kind of full of gratitude and for having known him and been inspired by him. And so, there are not many days that go by that I don't think about him, actually, but all of those thoughts are positive. So to hear about this does bring back that kind of sense of loss, I suppose.
The man captured this week, José Aranja Cardoso, was sentenced to 32 years in jail after he was found guilty of armed robbery leading to death. He'd been one of a small gang of pirates who'd boarded the boat Dr. Orams and Sir Peter were travelling on as part of an environmental mission. When the crew tried to defend themselves, Sir Peter was shot twice in the back. Details are scarce about Cardoso's escape from custody. RNZ's correspondent in Brazil, Alex Tortoriello, says it was pure luck that police encountered him this week in a routine check on the West Brazilian island of Marajo.
He was using his brother ID when he was caught, but police suspected something wrong, took him to the police station, and then he was had his identity checked, and then they realized it was not his brother, was actually him.
Mark Orams says he didn't know about Cardoso's escape. Today's news has been a reminder of what happened on the boat that night in December 2001.
My overwhelming sense at that time was for Peter's family, for the guys on board who were there at the time, for those who were the nearest and dearest of Peter and what they'd lost there. And then there was the sense of the loss of all the things he had yet to contribute and achieve that were so important.
He says he doesn't hold any resentment or bitterness towards the men, but he's glad justice has been done.
They were just a bunch of lowlifes who didn't really know the significance of what they were doing. They just saw a big boat at anchor and decided they would go and see what they could get for their own benefit. And as a consequence, we lost this wonderful New Zealander and this man who was doing something that was so important for the future of our planet.
Dr. Orams says he hopes people don't dwell too much on the tragedy, but try to focus on the outstanding New Zealander Sir Peter Blake was and the inspiration he still provides. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
We return now to a story we've been following since struck-off real estate agent Aaron Drever turned grocer in November of last year. Mr. Drever was stripped of his real estate licence in 2016 after he was found guilty of misconduct on 9 occasions over 5 years. In November, Mr. Drever was revealed as the new owner of a failed nosh grocery store in the Auckland suburb of Mount Eden. He told us he'd turned his life around. He'd re-employed some former nosh staff, and he told us if his new venture, the Grocers Market, failed, he would sell his house to pay staff and suppliers. But since we returned to air this year, Checkpoint has been contacted by an increasing number of staff and suppliers who say they are owed money by Mr. Drever. Here's Zach Fleming.
quite early on, I did get a gut feeling that it was he just wasn't going to pay me.
That gut feeling turned out to be right. Paloma Cheadle is the former marketing manager for the grocers market. She's owed more than $3,000.
Now, the reason for that is I just looked around. I just started observing the way that other people were being treated, these are other suppliers and employees.
She says she hasn't seen a cent from Aaron Drever for the 3 weeks she worked for him.
I have absolutely no faith in Aaron Drever. I think he's extremely dishonest. I have no confidence in getting paid.
Grant White owns Logotech, which supplied the uniforms for Grocers Market staff. He's one of 10 suppliers Checkpoint has spoken to in the past fortnight who are owed money by Aaron Drever. The smallest bill is just less than $700, the largest more than $30,000. Checkpoint interviewed the owner of one small business in the South Island yesterday who's owed more than $4,000 by Aaron Drever. Then we went to the Grocers Market.
Hi Aaron, it's Zach here. I'm just wondering why you haven't paid your bills. I've got 2 more suppliers that are saying they've been trying to get paid and you're not paying them.
We're working with all our suppliers, so please take it away.
We left, and Aaron Drever then contacted that South Island business owner. They then decided they no longer wanted to be part of the story. The situation is similar to a fortnight ago, when another supplier pulled out of a Checkpoint story after also being contacted by Mr. Drever. Grant White from Logotech is owed almost $4,000. He's now the second business owner owed money by Aaron Drever to take his case to the courts.
I found him to be extremely untrustworthy, an outright liar, in fact. Dishonest.
Can you give me a specific example of a time he's lied to you?
Oh, yes. The best example really is the original excuse as to why we hadn't been paid, because they didn't require any branding on their garments, and because of the urgency they actually picked them up from 2 of our suppliers, 2 wholesalers who operate out of Auckland directly. He claimed that they'd actually given a cheque to the suppliers. This was, well, there's no record of that ever happening. It's very unlikely, but what actually proved it to be an absolute lie was the fact that the only thing he had to go by was our invoice. Now, all the garments from both suppliers are listed on there, and there's a total. He would not have known which supplier was to get what amount. And so it was clearly just a lie. It couldn't possibly have happened.
Mr. White says going to the media and taking legal action was a last resort.
It doesn't really help our business. It's probably not going to do anything whatsoever to solve my issue, in other words, get my money. But I think it is definitely a warning to other businesses out there.
Paloma Cheadle is also considering legal action. She was also the marketing manager for Nosh, which went under last year, owing more than 100 employees, including Paloma, more than $300,000. Suppliers are also understood to be owed more than $1 million. Last question, any faith that you'll ever be paid?
No, I don't expect to. I actually know of quite a few people who are owed a lot more money than myself, people who literally did not go home to their families. They worked so hard and they're not getting paid. And I don't get that.
Paloma Cheadle talking to Zach Fleming. Zach is with me in the studio now. Zach, you've heard from Aaron Drever this afternoon?
Yeah, he declined repeated requests for an interview, but he sent us a statement late this afternoon. He said that he reiterated things he's previously said, that it was a far larger, far more complex challenge than he'd ever envisaged. But this is the first time he actually acknowledged that he does owe suppliers money. But he said he will pay them, and he reiterated again that if he has to sell his house to do that, he will do it. But he didn't say when he'll deem that necessary. So some of these bills are 3 months outstanding, and he wouldn't say, when is he going to sell his house if he needs to. He said he's working with the suppliers and says he has options, including obtaining a more experienced operator and selling the business, or getting a line of credit from banks, getting third-party investors, or restructuring. The statement continued that he has 380 suppliers and 30 staff, and that all those staff have been paid. But that obviously goes against the reporting that we know. I've talked to several former staff members who say they haven't been paid and Aaron owes them money. He finished his statement by accusing Checkpoint of painting a misleading picture and being overly alarmist because he has 380 suppliers and we've only spoken to around 10 of them. But we should have more on this story soon because there are quite a few suppliers who haven't spoken to us on the record yet because they're still hopeful that Aaron will pay them.
Zach Fleming, thank you very much indeed. Zach Fleming, who has been doing work on this story and the Nosh story before it. In no way responsible for the crash and merely a passenger. This is what the jury in the trial of 2 men accused of manslaughter after allegedly racing another car that crashed, killing its 4 occupants near Hamilton, have been told by defence lawyers. Dylan Cossey and Stephen Jones, both aged 20, face 4 counts of manslaughter, a charge of racing and not stopping to render assistance. Stephen Jones also faces a charge of trying to pervert the course of justice. Andrew McRae has been in the High Court in Hamilton for closing arguments in the trial.
Dylan Cossey was driving a car on State Highway 3 near Hamilton Airport in 2016 when a vehicle driven by Lance Robinson came up behind him, and it's then the Crown says the two started racing. A phone video recording taken in the car by Stephen Jones, showing the other vehicle passing them and then losing control seconds before ploughing into a van coming the other way. Crown Prosecutor Duncan McWilliam reminded the jury that witnesses who were passed by the 2 cars talked of very high speeds and noise, with one saying the vehicles were going so fast they appeared to be flying.
These are not just normal overtaking manoeuvres of slower cars, because they overtake and they disappear into the distance.
Mr McWilliams says there's no doubt that Lance Robinson, who was over the legal blood alcohol limit and had been taking drugs, lost control of his car and caused the crash. However, he says this doesn't absolve the defendants of their liability.
The fact that their driving, their speed, their involvement in this race was a substantive operating cause of Mr Robinson then overtaking and losing control.
The lawyer for Dylan Cossey, Philip Morgan QC, says it's stretching the law to say his client is guilty of manslaughter.
We know he didn't speed up to try and prevent Mr Robinson go past him. He didn't speed up to try and stay with Mr Robinson, as you do in your racing. On the contrary, he decelerates. Mr Robinson is able to complete his passing manoeuvre and lost it on the corner.
Stephen Jones's lawyer Russell Boot had a simple message for the jury.
Mr Jones was merely a passenger in that motor vehicle in June 2016. He did nothing more than film the overtaking manoeuvre of the skyline. And then, ladies and gentlemen, he took that footage into the police station to help them with their inquiries.
Justice Hinton will sum up the trial on Monday before the jury goes out to deliberate on its verdict. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae.
8.5 to 6. Go Ni and Hao. 1/6 of the world's population will welcome in the Chinese New Year today. In New Zealand, thousands of people of all ethnicities will flock to festivals in Auckland and Christchurch and elsewhere in the coming weeks to view spectacular lanterns and sample tasty street food. But for many, this is the extent of their interaction with the country's growing Chinese community. Our reporter Jessie Chang went to have sushi ye fan with the Lee family to see what their experience of living in New Zealand is like.
Steaming pots are on the stove and Susan's son is busy chopping up spring onions, a staple ingredient in Chinese dishes. She says Chinese New Year is a family affair for the household, and even after 22 years in New Zealand, it's still an important celebration. Ms. Sun says while her daughters enjoy the festivities, her youngest Brianna doesn't know a lot about her heritage.
Because she born here and she some of the Chinese culture she doesn't know, which is a shame.
Susan's mother-in-law, Li Yunfang, has her hands full of flour making dumplings for dinner. Ms. Li moved to New Zealand from Beijing over a decade ago, and she says while she enjoys living here, it was a difficult transition. She's turning 80 this year and she says it's been hard to learn English. Ms. Lee wishes her granddaughters would show more of an interest in the Chinese language and culture.
I wish they would learn Chinese so they don't lose it. Learning Chinese later on is very difficult, especially if you learn it by yourself. It's easier to learn speaking with your family.
But for 12-year-old Brianna and her 27-year-old sister Lucy Jacobson, learning about their Chinese identity hasn't been a big priority. Brianna prefers speaking English. Lucy agrees.
It's a bit of a hard one because when we came here there wasn't really any Chinese people at all, so I was probably the one or two in my whole year group when we came here in primary school. So I think for me, like, the need to sort of feel like adapting to the Kiwi culture was quite strong, and I've kind of, to my parents' dismay I suppose, sort of kept with that a bit.
It's only now that Lucy Jacobson's husband, who isn't Chinese, has shown interest in her culture, that she has started to learn more about her roots. She says while more New Zealanders take part in Chinese festivities, they don't know much about the culture.
Like, I think there is still definitely a stigma with Asian people in general. We didn't feel it as much, and I wonder if that's because it was, about 20 years ago that we came here, but now with the Asian population rising and sort of getting more negative stereotypes than positive ones, I think it's kind of sort of made, I suppose some people have a bit of a negative connotation with Asian people, and I think that's mainly just because they hear it in the media, or not because they've actually known a Chinese person, so it's more just like word of mouth and getting that message in their minds, really.
Her father, Bo Lee, says some Chinese can lead largely separate lives in New Zealand from other communities, and he wishes the country's Chinese population, which stands at more than 200,000, could have more of a voice in mainstream media.
If they really want to touch with Asian community, they should encourage Asian people to give them a space, to let the Asian people. I believe quite a lot of Chinese, they can speak English. They can speak very good English. Some people receive good education. So give them the space, encourage them to engage with media.
Seated around the table, the family tucks into an array of dishes, including snapper that Mr. Lee caught off Great Barrier Island. The fish represents prosperity for the coming year.
It's more than you need, put another way. It's more than you need in English, but in Chinese, 年年有余，余就是你剩下了吧，就是 more than you need. So it's good meaning. So we always have a fish on table for the new year.
After dinner, it's time for the hongbao that elders give to their children.
Now the same is going to my last year getting red bags. When I have my baby, then it's going to get passed out to her.
The red envelopes containing money are traditional Chinese New Year gifts. The Lee family is keen to keep up such traditions, but admits such occasions are mostly a time to gather together to see in another year. And while being Chinese and living in New Zealand has had its challenges, they've made it their home over the past 2 decades and look forward to many more. For Checkpoint, ko Jessie Chang aho. 新年快乐.
Lovely, Jessie. Let's head now to Papamoa, where frogs have invaded the peaceful Bay of Plenty settlement for the 2nd year in a row. Nikki Mando went to find out more.
When Carolyn Chatterton comes home from work these days, she opens her front door with care. But she's not worried about intruders, at least not the human kind. It's frogs, tiny green and golden bell frogs to be precise, that have Mrs. Chatterton in a bit of a tiz. Having frogs in your pad may not seem a terrifying experience, but insert mice, rats, spiders, or whatever your personal worst scuttling fear is, and you can understand what she's feeling, especially when the frogs get into her bedroom and ensuite at night.
One woke my husband up, and he said it was on the ceiling, and it actually fell onto the floor. And they make this horrendous squealing noise when they're either confronted or they're scared of something. That's what they're doing inside the house. They're just squealing the whole time. So they're obviously frightened of being inside and not being able to get out.
Mrs. Chatterton says the frogs are small enough to squeeze under doors, but when they stretch out to jump, they're as big as your hand, and they aren't easy to evict.
My husband gets a broom and he just tries to sort of corner them and then pushes them towards the door and then pokes them out the door. They are quite hard to spot though, and I mean, when they're scared, they can make themselves very flat and get into like tiny spaces.
Professor Phil Bishop from the University of Otago is a world expert on frogs and on amphibian survival and conservation. He's excited by the plague, which also hit Papamoa last year. Bell frogs love hot, wet conditions, and Professor Bishop says they'll be breeding happily in pools and ponds around Papamoa. One female frog can lay 3,500 eggs, and once the tadpoles turn into frogs, they have to get away from water to avoid being eaten by herons and other predators. The young frogs turn up in people's houses looking for insects, which in turn are attracted by lights at night. But once indoors, the frogs get scared and scream.
They're probably getting stressed because inside a house is not a very good place for a frog to be because it's very dry. So even the act of going across a dry carpet could be enough of an irritant on their skin. They get stressed, and so they'll scream because they think they're being attacked by a very big, furry, dry predator.
Professor Bishop can't think of anything nicer than sharing his bedroom with a few frogs. But for those like Mrs. Chatterton and other Papamoa residents who aren't so keen, he's got some advice.
If she doesn't want the frog, she should probably not use outside lights. She should make sure that her windows and doors are shut and put a draft excluder under the door. And it'll only be for a week or two, and then they will have dispersed and moved on to other places where they prefer to live.
He says the people of Papamoa should be proud of their frogs.
Frogs are very sensitive to things like pesticides and herbicides. Any chemicals that can get into the water will just go straight into the frogs. So the very fact that in Papamoa they're getting really good populations, it means that they are very environmentally friendly practices that the people are using there.
Some comfort perhaps for the people next time they see a green and golden bell frog hopping across their bedroom floor at night. For Checkpoint, Nikki Mando.
And Nikki's delightful story brings us to the Pips.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. There have been tears and anger at a candlelit vigil in Parkland, Florida, following yesterday's deadly school shooting. 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz has been charged with the murder of 17 people after the shooting at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. Police say he ran through the three-storey school building, shooting into more than half a dozen classrooms with an AR-15 assault rifle before leaving the scene by blending in with fleeing students. The father of 16-year-old Jamie Gutenberg, who was killed in the attack, says everyone failed to keep her safe.
I sent her to school yesterday. She was supposed to be safe. My job is to protect my children, and I sent my kid to school. What is unfathomable is Jamie took a bullet and is dead.
The father of one of the victims of the Florida school shootings. Tonga's National Emergency Management Office says their key focus is on gaining access to the people most affected by Cyclone Gita. Navini Aho says the weather in Tonga is still not favourable and has showed some of the efforts to clear debris from, or rather slowed some of the efforts to clear the debris from roads. He says teams are trying their best to get to everyone.
And that's been a challenge. It wasn't until last night that we could get the full access. The road was cleared because it taken quite a long time to get clearance. So for us to send out the assessment team and also, get looking at what the extent of the damage done.
Mr. Aho says now that international assistance has arrived, combined teams from the military, police and the disaster office are all helping to distribute aid to those who need it most. An Australian MP says he's shocked by New Zealand's academics' claim that the Chinese government has tried to intimidate her. Christchurch political science professor Anne-Marie Brady says she got a letter this week warning she would be attacked. Then on Wednesday, burglars took 3 laptops from her home. She blames the Chinese government, and Christchurch police say an investigation is underway. New South Wales MP Julianne Leesource had asked Professor Brady at a parliamentary committee in Canberra yesterday if she had faced intimidation.
Australian academics have put to us that they have suffered consequences of speaking about foreign interference, and I was keen to hear, given Professor Brady has been outspoken on these issues, whether there had been any consequences for her. And I was shocked at what she'd said.
New South Wales MP Julian Leesaw. The Chinese embassy in Wellington says no one is available to comment. The Crown says 2 men charged over the death of 4 people in a car crash near Hamilton in 2016 are as guilty as the driver of the vehicle it says they were chasing. Dylan Cossey and Stephen Jones, who are both aged 20, face 4 counts of manslaughter, a charge of racing and not stopping to render assistance. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae has been in the High Court.
The Crown Prosecutor Duncan McWilliams said the men's driving and the speed they were going was a substantive cause of the other driver overtaking them and losing control. Dylan Cossey's lawyer Philip Morgan QC said it's stretching the law to say his client is guilty of manslaughter. Stephen Jones's lawyer Russell Boot said his client was merely a passenger who did nothing more than film what was happening. Justice Hinton will sum up the case on Monday before the jury retires. In Hamilton, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's public criticism of his deputy and coalition partner Barnaby Joyce over his handling of his extramarital affair has turned into a full-blown row. Mr Joyce has labelled Mr Turnbull's comments as inept. The ABC's James Fettis has more from Canberra.
Barnaby Joyce is taking a week's leave amid the fallout from his affair with a former media advisor. Yesterday, Malcolm Turnbull delivered a scathing assessment of Mr Joyce's behaviour.
He has set off a world of woe for those women and appalled all of us.
Mr Joyce has now called those comments harmful and inept.
All that's going to do is once more pull the scab off.
Mr Joyce has also hit out at Liberals pushing for a change in Nationals leadership, saying all it does is get the party to lock behind its leader.
James Fettis reporting. The Christchurch City Council wants to raise rates by more than 5%, partly to help cover remaining earthquake repairs. The proposed 5.5% increase comes as part of the council's draft long-term plan, which will be debated at a meeting next week. The Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell says infrastructure is the biggest challenge, which the council expects to spend more than $4 billion on in the next decade. Ms Dalzell says this is partly because a lot of the earthquake damage was not repaired under the former infrastructure program, SCIRT, or the cost-sharing agreement with the government. She says the council either has to delay or drop some projects or increase rates. It's 6:05. Eden Park's tantalising short boundaries could be Australia's undoing when they play New Zealand in their Tri-Series Cricket International in Auckland tonight. The ground's straight boundaries are among the shortest in the world, making it tempting for batsmen to hit out. But Australia Vice-Captain Aaron Finch is urging caution.
Caused me a few issues in the past. I've got a little bit carried away and you tend to think a bit too far ahead. In my experience, you find that you start thinking everything in boundaries and sixes as opposed to just sticking to your game plan, because them shots naturally come anyway. So it can be inviting for guys who come here first time, and we've talked about that. There's guys who have had a bit of experience here now, so hopefully we don't fall into that trap again.
And a win tonight for the Black Caps will guarantee them a place in Wednesday's Tri-Series final against Australia. But if they lose, they'll need to beat England on Sunday to confirm a final spot. New Zealand skeleton sled racer Rhys Thornberry says he's devastated after a horror final run in the medal round at the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. Thornberry went into the 4th and final round in 6th equal spot, but lost his run-up just as he was about to launch himself onto the sled. He eventually posted a time of 52.14 seconds, nearly a second and a half slower than his best run of the competition, to finish 20th. Thornberry described the mishap as the worst possible thing that could have happened to him on his run. And it was also a tough day for New Zealand skier Alice Robinson, who failed to complete her opening run and is effectively out of contention in the women's slalom. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights. Country life goes hang gliding. Is it the new way to do the high country muster? We talked to Karen Hay about what she's been doing lately, which is also what she plans to do next week. And because today marks the Chinese New Year, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to the world's most populous nation on Nights Seeing in the Year of the Dog with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Long fine spells, isolated showers about eastern Northland today and developing elsewhere tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine. However, cloudy periods and the odd light shower about the Tararua district. Orowhenua to Wellington, cloudy, a few showers mainly about the ranges. Marlborough and Nelson fine, a few showers developing tomorrow morning though about Golden Bay and the Sounds, spreading elsewhere in the evening. For Bulla, a few showers today, rain tomorrow briefly heavy, then clearing later. Westland and Fiordland, rain, heavy with possible thunderstorms spreading north, clearing from the south tomorrow but a few showers remaining about Fiordland. Canterbury to Southland, high cloud with scattered rain in Southland and Otago this evening, spreading elsewhere tomorrow morning before it clears. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much, Hannah Thompson. It's been wonderful having you back with us this week.
Always good to be here.
Yeah, we always enjoy having you. Thank you. Have a lovely weekend.
You too.
You're going to the cricket tonight, aren't you?
Oh, well, no, actually I'm not. No, but I will be watching it on the TV, by golly. Go the Black Caps.
Thanks, Hannah. Hundreds of people have gathered for a prayer vigil in Parkland, Florida, in the wake of yesterday's deadly school shooting. 17 people were killed when 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz opened fire with an AR-15 style assault rifle at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Police say he escaped the scene by blending in with fleeing students and then walked very coolly into a nearby shopping centre where he ordered a drink from Subway and food from McDonald's before being captured about 40 minutes later. The BBC's Eileen Muckball is in Parkland.
Gary, does he know where the shooter is?
For hours, children at a high school found themselves in a combat zone.
17 Julia 5, I have the gunshot victim.
There was mayhem and bloodshed as a gunman stalked its corridors. Shots can be heard close by as terrified pupils sheltered in their classroom, fearing for their own lives.
He went up and down the hallway, just banging and shooting into the classrooms. He shot through my door and broke the window.
And then all of a sudden we hear one of our student government teachers say, "Run as fast as you can," and we hear a gunshot.
Police did finally get to every classroom, the fear palpable.
Hands, put your hands up, please.
Survivors were ushered through the corridors with hands on their heads, police marksmen watching closely in case a gunman was still among them. The first of those identified as having been killed was Aaron Feiss, a football coach and security guard at the school. One of many vigils being held for those who died, and shocking here to see the faces of so many young people who yesterday were attending what they thought was a regular day at school and today are mourning friends who sat beside them in their classrooms. The killer escaped with fleeing school children, but was soon arrested without a struggle. He's 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, a young man known for having a fascination with guns and who even, it now appears, threatened in a social media post to become what he called a professional school shooter.
Are you Nicholas Jacob Cruz?
Yes, ma'am.
A leader of a white nationalist militia says Cruz had taken part in paramilitary training with them.
Something very important to tell you. You're charged with some very serious crimes.
Kevin Trejos found the girl who'd sat next to him in an English class earlier in the day was one of those who died. He also knew the gunman, who'd been a former student at the very same school he attacked.
He's someone who used racial slurs, who was just awful to other people, and I'm sure he was bullied himself by some, but he was the type of person where people were scared to bully him because they knew something could happen. They just didn't think this would happen. It makes me angry because, you know, we all knew him, we all knew that there was a potential for something to go wrong. It just sucks that we couldn't stop him.
These thoughts are the type with which no children should have to burden themselves. But in a country where there have been more than 200 school shootings in less than 5 years, more and more are being touched by such horrors.
Incredible numbers, those school shootings in America, 18 so far this year. Obviously not nearly such an issue in most other parts of the world, but in New Zealand a number of schools do own guns which are used by students. No one is sure exactly how many schools or where they are. Attempts to create a register were abandoned in July of last year when it was pointed out it could simply provide a shopping list for criminals. Charlie Drever looks at this.
Guns appear to be largely kept by rural schools and are used for sport and safety education. But the Ministry of Education could not give an overall number of how many schools kept firearms. New Zealand Secondary Principals Council Chair James Morris says the level of interest varies from student to student.
For some students it'll just be part of their life in the rural community on the farms. For some students they are involved in it as a sport, and we've had a number of students who've been very successful with their shooting as a sport, and that's just being part of a local club, just like being involved in any other sport.
The ministry has a committee which advises it on issues around firearms in schools. But in July last year, the group recommended against creating a database of schools that hold guns. Firearm safety specialist Nicole McKee was part of that group and says it made the right decision.
We do have licensed legal owners that are burgled, and once you have a public list of where firearms are being kept, then unfortunately the criminal element may be able to obtain that list and the schools could be broken into.
The group has been criticised for having 18 members representing firearm owners. Marie Russell from Otago University's Department of Public Health is unhappy about the makeup of the 48 members.
From the research we've been doing, it seems as though firearms organisations have had ready access to Prime Ministers, Ministers and MPs, that they are well organised in that lobbying, and that they certainly have had the ear of government, in this case over the Ministry of Education.
Marie Russell says public health authorities should also have been included.
This makes it very challenging if, for example, regional public health authorities want to go to schools where firearms are used to talk about lead, for example, which is a health risk for children. And in fact, nobody will know which of those schools are there. And the ministry, in the minutes, it says, took this piece of work about making a register of schools with firearms out of its work program. I think the gun lobby has been particularly effective in this regard.
But Nicole McKee defends the position of firearm owners in the group.
Firearm owners are vocal, and they need to be vocal in order to maintain what they have and to be able to move forward with any changes. So I think we just have a loud voice, and we're entitled to have that.
The group is also helping the ministry to create safety guidelines for keeping guns in schools. There are no current instructions, although schools must comply with firearm legislation by keeping guns disabled, locked in a safe, and only using them under the supervision of those with a licence. A ministry spokeswoman says while it does not support unsupervised access of firearms, it acknowledges there may be legitimate circumstances where they are used as part of education or sporting activities. For Checkpoint, I'm Charlie Drever.
Let's look at the weather. It's a warm old evening in many parts of the country. 26 in Auckland as we go to air, 29 in Christchurch right now, and we're in for a warm, dry weekend, but it's not likely to last, with tropical cyclone Gita expected to reach New Zealand early next week. Now, the Met Service is advising people living from Nelson in the south through to Auckland in the north, up the west coast, to spend the weekend clearing drains and tying everything down before the Category 3 storm brings destructive winds and heavy rain on Tuesday somewhere along that coastline. Met Service meteorologist Georgina Griffiths came into the studio this afternoon and I asked her what we can expect.
Well, tonight it's still a Category 3, an intense Category 3 system. It's not that far off Noumea at the moment, still tracking west, but expected to start moving south tomorrow, overnight tonight and tomorrow. And of course, Met Service will inherit all warnings and responsibilities with Cyclone Gita once it crosses 25 south. Still is a very vigorous system, still is a tropical system actually. And at that point, we're going to have a better idea once it starts to come out of the tropics and transitions into an extratropical system. Saturday night, we think, once it starts coming away. Now, people, just for the listeners, extratropical system doesn't mean it's any weaker than what it currently is. It's going to be a very deep low, and we're using the words highly impactful for New Zealand. We do know it's tracking directly to New Zealand. It will make landfall somewhere in New Zealand, and the D-Day looks like Tuesday. At this stage, highest confidence on Tuesday impacts and into Wednesday. So what we're not as clear on is the landfall area, and I think we've got an idea, but there's still some uncertainty, particularly around that Tuesday landfall. So we can talk about which region's likely to get most impacted and what we do know, but it's not a given yet.
And the problem with having those conversations now is people think I'm off the hook, and then suddenly it changes its path.
Good point. So during the weekend, Saturday night when we inherit the information, we'll update people. It's more likely to be Sunday before we really define what Tuesday, Wednesday looks like. Even maybe midnight Monday, depends on the timing a bit. Now, so all I'd say is for people, if you're weather dependent or even if you're not, but you know, this is a big intense system and we're fairly concerned for New Zealand at a national level with this one. Keep up with the warnings, watches and information from Met Service around about Sunday.
What are you concerned about? The rain or the wind or both?
Oh, both. So I'll tell you where at this stage, there's probably 60-70% chance it makes landfall somewhere in the upper North Island. New Plymouth to Auckland is the current hotspot for landfall. There's a bit of play in that, of course. Some of the models actually cross Auckland and a few of them more towards the top of the South Island. So not yet clear. But if it were to make a crossing of the North Island late Tuesday and into Wednesday, and somewhere between New Plymouth and Auckland, wind is going to be top end around the system.
So what are we talking about? What's top end?
Oh, I mean, some regions won't see as much because, of course, New Zealand has mountains and some areas like to blow. Cook Strait to New Plymouth looks really good for top-end wind. I wouldn't like to put a number on it yet. The exact track has a very large impact on what sort of impacts we actually see. We could see 150 kilometre an hour gusts easily, which is huge.
Yeah.
Our warnings start at 110 and we start to see the non-linear impacts. So, the bigger the number, the bigger the mess. And we're talking, this is a nice weekend for most of New Zealand. Let's start to have a wee think about your property or your boat or your batch and really think about what will North Island do if it's very, very windy, and top of the South Island as well. So that wind is probably the key concern, particularly for places like Auckland at this stage. Rainfall, lower North Island if it makes that New Plymouth through Auckland track, and that's if, remember, 60 to 70% chance. Looks really wet, very wet, really large warning amounts of rainfall, potentially flood making. I would use the word flooding. Lower North Island if it tracks there, and north of the South Island. So those places like Nelson that really copped fahy may well be in the firing line again. So I draw your attention to lower North Island, top of the South for rainfall.
Sea surges?
Yes, so this is going to depend a great deal on timing. Does it come in on a high tide and where? So regionally that's very dependent. Does it make landfall somewhere between New Plymouth to Auckland, or is it Auckland itself, or is it the top of the South Island? Again, too early to tell detail, but yes, coastal storm surge with a very deep centre. We might be seeing something below 980 as it comes on, which is adding a lot to our sea level. So the only good piece of news we've got is that we don't have king tides, but I'm not sure for some specific regions, and of course we'll update hard on Monday morning. It may not make a difference. I don't know if king tides with this particular deep system for some regions it might not matter. We might see very large coastal impacts for some parts.
Right, so to conclude, there are two very strong messages. One is pay attention to what the Met Service is telling us,
yes.
And two is if you are in any of the areas that have been identified, and that is a pretty large sweep of the country.
Yeah, chunk of New Zealand.
Yeah, tie stuff down, get stuff inside and get ready.
Yeah, I think get ready, be prepared, and if we get lucky, those regions that are most impacted will be smaller than that Marlborough to Auckland region, but I'd be prepared for this one. We're keeping close eyes on it.
Georgina Griffiths, excellent forecaster for the Met Service. Of course, Gita is coming towards us. It's been through Tonga, and there police have extended the curfew in the capital as the country continues its clean-up. That's an overnight curfew. Gita made landfall there on Monday. Tuesday, flattened Parliament, destroyed nearly 200 homes, a lot of homes severely damaged. RNZ Pacific reporter Koru Vakauta and visual journalist, Koru Vakauta and visual journalist Richard Tindalin have been out in Tongatapu today.
4 days after Cyclone Gita, and authorities are still struggling to get supplies to those who most need it. We followed a convoy of 8 trucks manned with emergency personnel as it wove its way to the northeastern districts of Tongatapu. Half of the villages that need assistance are still waiting, with concerns already expressed about the speed of the distribution. Aid's been handled twice. It's dropped to the town officer, who is then seen as the person appropriate to distribute to those in need. A few kilometres up the road from the drop-off point, we met a family in Talasiu who had no roof on their house and were still waiting for help. Kalote Leao says something to keep his family dry is a must. What we need is clothes to wear and stuff to sleep on. All the stuff in the house is already damaged. That's all we need, clothes and something to sleep on. We drive further up the road to Talafuao and meet Lose and Tamani Kata, who have lost everything and so far have only received tools and cooking utensils.
Many things we need, foods, our kids' clothes, but especially our house.
Back in town, the clothing store Asena Tonga manages is closed for business. You hope to get back in 1 month. Can you still sell some stock or you lost everything?
Lost everything.
Asena is relying on what she calls offer or love of her family and friends to get the shop back on its feet. They're selling crops to contribute to the repairs and also volunteering their time to help. She's aiming for a month to get back into business, and with that kind of support, could bet against her. From Nuku'alofa for Checkpoint, I'm Koro Vakauta.
Thank you, Koro. It's 23 minutes past 6. New Zealand mixed martial artist Israel Adesanya has risen to instant fame after making his long-awaited debut in the UFC. And for those of you who don't know what the UFC is, hands up, John. We're talking about the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and Israel has stunned the world with an impressive second-round knockout win over Australian Rob Wilkinson in Perth. Now he wants to work towards a middleweight title, but standing in his way is South Auckland-born fighter Robert Whittaker. Ravinda Hunia with this report.
Declaring the winner by TKO, Israel, the last style bender.
The UFC has been knocking on the door for New Zealand mixed martial arts fighter Israel Adesanya since 2015. But the Nigerian-born New Zealander says he's made a point of entering the competition on his own terms. For 8 years, he's competed in all forms of MMA in preparation for the UFC competition under coach Eugene Beerman, the same coach as fellow New Zealander Dan Hooker. Now, after a successful second-round knockout on debut in Perth, he becomes New Zealand's 5th fighter to make his mark on the world's biggest MMA stage, while fulfilling an important promise.
The win meant a lot, not just to me really, but to him, to Eugene, because we made a promise. The day we found out Jamie, one of my teammates, passed away, we were here for about an hour afterward. And before I left that day, I just said goodbye, and then he shook my hand, gave me a hug, and said, "I promised him I'll take him to the UFC. Now he can't. Now you have to." So it's sentimental to me to kind of get that win.
The 28-year-old calls himself the last style bender with an unblemished 12-0 MMA record. He holds a boxing record of 5-0 and also holds a whopping 74 wins and 5 losses in kickboxing as well. And he believes the best is yet to come.
If you think about it, it just makes it more sweet. Yeah, not special, but more sweet. Just kind of like, you can't enjoy the sunshine without a little rain. So I've been rained on, now I'm about to shine. I think I'm just about to hit my prime. So yeah, the world's gonna know soon.
With his debut came controversy. Adesanya mimicked urinating in the octagon, catching the attention of millions on social media.
It's me claiming my spot, I know dogs when a dog has dominant tendencies, it walks into a yard or in a dog park and just head high, tail high, and just starts to pee on everything to claim it.
With cage jitters now behind him, Adesanya is focusing on claiming the UFC middleweight title. He has reportedly impressed UFC CEO Dana White and has the attention of lead UFC analyst Joe Rogan, backing Adesanya as a serious contender for the title in the future.
He threw the fake kick and then popped the jab in with zero, there's no wind-up. There's no telegraphing at all. Everything's firing in straight and clean. And if he can keep these guys off him in terms of his takedown defense, he's a dangerous guy.
His takedown defense looks pretty damn good to me.
He plans to be back in the octagon within the next 3 months, but a shot at the title may leave New Zealand fans torn. As of right now, Adesanya would have to face current champion and South Auckland-born Robert Whittaker to achieve it. Adesanya adding substance to a growing and dominating New Zealand MMA contingent. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pō nei, ko Ravinda Hunia, aho.
27 minutes past 6. The Roaring Twenties are alive and kicking in Hawke's Bay as the annual Art Deco Festival swings into full gear. More than 40,000 visitors from around the world are expected to descend on the region as the event celebrates its 30th anniversary. Our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley, went to check out what's going on.
The sun is out and it's all about the cars, the fashion, and celebrating Hawke's Bay's glorious Art Deco architecture. The festival's first ever Junior Gatsby picnic in Napier yesterday gave hundreds of school children a taste of the era.
We're from Flaxmere Primary in Hastings. So kia ora. Kia ora.
The picnic is one of 285 events being held across Napier and Hastings over 5 days, attracting thousands of visitors and 160 volunteers. The theme of this year's festival is music, but for these punters, it's all about the fashion.
Fashion. Watching everyone dressed up, especially the children. Like today's fabulous, seeing all the children and the young people getting dressed up.
So we've done 15 summer and 1 winter. We thought we'd try a winter one year just for something different.
That's amazing. So what do you love about the Art Deco period?
Oh, I just love the clothes and everything about it.
It's a very stylish period. Everything about it. Everyone has such high standards of dress. The motor vehicles, so much fantastic bling in the cars. Everything about it is really attractive. It's a glamorous period.
Glenn Pickering from the Art Deco Trust is in charge of bringing the festival together.
About 40,000 people who attend over the festival, over the 5 days. International guests is about 4,000 to 5,000 people, and then we have another 8,000 that come from outside the region. So in terms of what it does economically for Hawke's Bay, just astronomical.
About 300 vintage cars are also in town for the event, including 8 Bentleys all the way from Gloucester, UK. The Napier Mayor, Bill Dalton, says the festival is not only a bit of fun, but a major boost to the local economy.
Oh, it's an enormous boost, and it's a chance to have a party. And we like any chance to have a party, but this, we bring 35 to 40,000 visitors and something like $12 million boost to the economy. So it is just fabulous.
Thousands are expected to attend a free concert at Napier's Sound Shell tonight. And for those wanting something a bit more decadent, Mission Estate Winery is hosting a Great Gatsby party tomorrow evening. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
And on that wonderfully tuneful note, that is Checkpoint for the week. Just looking at the weather in Napier for the weekend. 31-degree high tomorrow and on Sunday. Wow. Thank you everyone for being with us this week. On behalf of our really wonderful, hard-working and delightful team, it's been a pleasure having your company. Have a great weekend. We will be back Monday night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Washington politicians have been taking the President Donald Trump and the Republican Speaker of the House Paul Ryan to task for refusing to discuss gun laws in the wake of the Florida school shootings. Tongan emergency officials say continuing challenging weather has been slowing efforts to clear debris caused by Cyclone Gita. An Australian MP says he's shocked by a New Zealand academic's claim that the Chinese government has tried to intimidate her. And the Christchurch City Council wants to raise rates by more than 5%, partly to help cover remaining earthquake repairs. Our next news and weather at 7.
Everyone pretty much agrees that honesty and openness are good qualities, right? But is there ever such a thing as too much transparency?
So I believe that inside of a company, everybody should know what everybody gets paid.
Which is crazy.